The first time I knew something wasn't right, I was standing outside my daughter's new daycare watching her through the glass. She was just 5 years old, standing by herself, holding that worn little rabbit she's had since she was 2. The other kids were laughing, painting building with blocks. But Zoe just stood there still as stone, staring at the mirror on the far wall. And the way her lips moved like she was whispering to someone, it made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't explain. Before we start, hit subscribe to help uncover stories they tried to bury and make sure no name stays forgotten. My name's James Hall. I'm originally from Kentucky, but after Zoe's mom passed, I took a job in Sunnybrook, Ohio. Small town, clean streets, lots of maple trees. It looked like the kind of place where kids could still ride their bikes until dark without worry. I was 38, working in logistics, day job, decent hours, and I just needed a place where Zoe could start fresh, where we both could. That first week, I unpacked every box myself. I set up Zoe's room with her bookshelf, her glow-in-the-dark stars, the closet door she always made me check twice. She was a quiet kid, smart, sensitive. The kind of child who didn't run through places she walked and watched. I thought Sunnybrook would be good for her. A quiet neighborhood, a steady job, and a modest little house on Magnolia Lane. We weren't rich, but we were okay. The daycare was called Sunnybrook Early Learning, painted yellow with paper butterflies in the windows and a fenced-in play yard out back. It looked normal. That first morning, I held her hand as we walked up the steps. She didn't say much, just clung to that stuffed rabbit and kept her eyes low. She didn't cry, didn't fuss, but she didn't smile either. When I knelt down to say goodbye, she whispered, "Can I come to work with you instead?" I gave her a tight hug, told her we'd get ice cream after I picked her up. She nodded, but didn't look up. By the time I got off work and pulled back into the lot, I figured I'd see her laughing with the other kids, or at least sitting near someone. But she was off by herself, standing near the chain-link fence facing the trees, not moving. When I called her name, she turned slowly. Her face was blank, like she was somewhere else entirely. I crouched down and asked how her first day went. She didn't say anything at first. Then, after a long pause, she just said, "Fine." Nothing else. That night, she didn't ask for a snack, didn't ask for a bedtime story, just walked straight to her room and stood near her dresser watching the mirror. I asked her what she was doing. She said nothing, then added almost too quietly, "She doesn't talk when you're here." It felt like the air left the room. I tried to shake it off. Told myself it was the stress of moving, that she just missed her old home. But as the days went by, the silence got heavier. She started humming a song I didn't recognize, soft, slow, almost like a lullaby, and she stared into mirrors more often, not looking at herself, looking into them, like she was waiting for something. One night after dinner, I found a new drawing on the fridge, 2 stick figures, one labeled Zoe. The other was taller, blacked out, no face, just a heavy scribble of thick, jagged lines. When I asked her who it was, she shrugged, said, "She doesn't like you," then walked away. The next morning, I dropped Zoe off at daycare like usual. Miss Pence, the teacher, greeted her at the door. She was polite, professional, but as she took Zoe's hand and led her into the classroom, I noticed something. Zoe looked back at me, not scared, not sad, just blank, like she was bracing for something I couldn't see. That evening, I picked her up at 3 sharp. But when I got there, Zoe wasn't with the others. She was standing in the exact same place as before by the fence, staring into the trees. And that's when I started to feel it for real. That quiet, creeping dread that something had followed us to Sunnybrook. Something I couldn't name yet, but it was already in our house, already watching her. And she knew, long before I did. I didn't sleep much after that second week in Sunnybrook. Most nights I'd lie in bed long after Zoe was tucked in the baby monitor, flickering beside me, waiting for something to happen that I couldn't name. I kept telling myself it was just the stress of moving the daycare adjustment, the change in routine, but every time I'd start to believe that something would happen to pull me right back. That night, around 3 in the morning, I woke suddenly. No dream I could remember. Just that sense like someone was standing too close in a dark room. I reached for the monitor. Zoe looked peaceful on the screen, curled up in her blanket, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. I almost shut it off. Almost. But I kept watching. Something in me wanted to make sure. A few minutes passed. Then her body shifted slow like she was sleepwalking, but she didn't get out of bed. She just sat up, stiff hands folded neatly in her lap, her head tilted down like she was praying or listening. And then her lips moved. No sound came through. I turned the volume up, adjusted the signal. Still nothing. Her mouth moved like she was having a full conversation, and then she turned to face the mirror. Not a glance, a full turn of the head, deliberate and slow. The reflection stared back. I blinked hard, leaned in. The delay I expected to see, the slight digital lag, wasn't there. But the image still didn't make sense. The reflection was smiling. Zoe wasn't. Then the reflection tilted its head just slightly. A moment later, Zoe followed. Not the other way around. That was when my stomach turned. It wasn't a delay. It was out of sync. Then the monitor cut to static. I was off the couch and down the hallway before I could think. Her bedroom door creaked open and I rushed in. She was asleep. Rabbit under her chin, her breathing slow and steady. I stared at the mirror across from her bed. Just a mirror. Nothing wrong with the glass, nothing moving. But something in that room felt heavy, like the air had thickened. I checked the footage again, but the recording had cut out at the exact moment the reflection moved on its own. That part never came back. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, she was quiet at breakfast, swinging her feet and eating cereal like nothing had happened. And then she started humming again. Same melody as before, slow, distant, almost mournful. I knelt down beside her and asked as gently as I could, "Sweetheart, do you still talk to the girl in the mirror?" She paused, spoon halfway to her mouth, and looked at me without blinking. Then she gave the smallest nod. I kept my voice calm. "Does she have a name?" She shook her head. "She doesn't need one." I dropped her off at daycare and sat in the car for 10 minutes before going to work. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had started and we were already too far in. That night I went back through old forums, local news archives, anything I could find. I didn't even know what I was searching for, just some sign that someone else had seen what I saw. At first, nothing. Just parent reviews, happy photos of kids painting and reading. But then one link caught my eye. A message board post from 3 years back. No replies. Just one sentence from an anonymous user. "Anyone else's kid talk about the girl in the mirrors. My son says she's real." That was all. The next morning, I returned to the daycare. I told the front desk I had a question about Zoe's file. The receptionist turned to grab a folder, and while her back was turned, I slipped down the hallway. There was one storage room I'd seen before, always closed, marked for staff. The door was cracked. I stepped in and shut it behind me. The room smelled like dust and old plastic. Shelves of books, tubs of toys, broken chairs. I moved quickly, scanning boxes and binders, looking for anything out of place. Then I saw it. A pink backpack under a stack of torn paper and laminated flashcards. I pulled it out. The name stitched on the front was hard to read, but after brushing away the grime, I saw it Emily. Inside were colored pencils, a folded sweater, and a few wrinkled drawings. One caught my breath. It showed 2 figures, one small, one tall. The larger figure was drawn in thick black scribbles. No face, no name. Just a shadow. I took out my phone and snapped a picture. Then I turned toward the door and saw Miss Pence standing there. She didn't look angry, just still. She took a slow step into the room and said, "You shouldn't be here." I asked her straight out, "Who is Emily?" Her eyes shifted just barely to the drawing in my hand, then back to me. "You need to leave." I didn't move. I held up the backpack. This was hers, wasn't it? You knew she was here, for the first time since Zoe started there. Miss Pence dropped her polite tone. She exhaled and her voice lowered. "You don't understand what you're getting into, Mr. Hall." I told her to help me understand. There was a long pause. Then she smiled. Not kindly, cold. "You're overstepping." She reached for the backpack, but instead grabbed my wrist. Her grip was tight, her voice barely a whisper. "This is private property. You broke in. I could call the police right now." I looked at her and realized she wasn't bluffing. She'd done this before, knew exactly how to push someone out without making a scene. I let go, walked past her, said nothing else. That night I didn't eat. Zoe drew at the table while I sat across from her in silence. After a while, I slid one of the photos I'd printed out across the table. A picture of a girl with curly blonde hair smiling in a daycare classroom. "Do you know her?" I asked. Zoe stared at it for a long time, then shook her head. I started to pull it away. That's when she whispered, "That's not her. She looks different now." I froze. Different how I asked. But she wouldn't say. She just pushed the photo away and went back to her drawing. I sat there looking at the image, wondering what she meant, wondering what had changed, wondering how long that girl Emily had been waiting in that mirror, and whether she was still waiting now. I didn't know who to talk to after that night. I didn't have a name for what was happening, and even if I did, I wasn't sure how to say it out loud without sounding like I'd lost my grip. I called my sister Emily just to hear someone who knew Zoe. I told her the move had been harder than expected, that Zoe wasn't adjusting like I thought she would. Emily said all the right things. Kids take time. New routines can throw them off. But I could tell she was only half listening. She didn't hear what I was really trying to say. And honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted her to. I hung up before I said too much. That same night, after Zoe went to sleep, I typed out a long email to the director of the daycare, then deleted it. The words looked strange when I saw them written down. My daughter talks to someone in the mirror. There's a girl who hums through her mouth. I think her reflection is moving when she isn't. I couldn't even finish the message. Instead, I called the daycare the next morning and asked to speak with Miss Pence. She answered like she always did, calm, polite, patient. When I asked her directly if Zoe had been acting unusually in class, she said, "No more than any other child her age." I pushed. I asked if she had seen Zoe speak to herself or seem withdrawn or stare at the mirrors. There was a pause. Then she said, "It's not uncommon for children to have active imaginations, especially after a move." Her tone stayed flat, professional. The kind of voice that makes you feel like you're the one who's overreacting. I asked if anyone else had ever reported anything strange happening there, any other children talking about things they couldn't explain. She paused again, just a breath longer this time. "Not that I'm aware of." That was it. No follow-up, no curiosity, just a full stop. When I picked Zoe up that afternoon, I looked for any sign of change. She was in the same spot again, standing near the edge of the playground, not playing with the others. Miss Pence stood at the door, waving to another parent. I asked her quietly if we could talk again just a few minutes. She smiled and said, "I'm afraid I have a staff meeting," and stepped inside. Zoe didn't say a word on the drive home. She looked out the window the whole way, her reflection catching in the glass at every stoplight. That night I decided to install the new monitor. It was a higher-end model with night vision and motion detection. I set it up on her dresser and made sure it had a clear view of the bed, the closet, and most of all, the mirror. Zoe watched me as I adjusted the angle. She didn't ask what it was. She didn't ask anything. When I told her it was just to help me keep her safe at night, she nodded like she already knew. That silence, her not asking, was the part that stayed with me. As if whatever was happening, she'd already accepted it. I stayed up again that night, watching the monitor. Around midnight, I saw her sit up in bed, same posture as before, hands in her lap, head bowed. Then her head turned toward the mirror. The screen glitched once, then came back. The reflection was moving. Not violently, not even quickly, but off. It would blink before she did, tilt slightly the wrong way. The kind of thing that would be easy to miss if you weren't watching for it. I stayed glued to the screen for almost an hour before the image finally went still again. No noise, no movement, just Zoe lying down asleep. The next day I brought it up again, this time with a different teacher I saw in the hallway. Miss Carla, I think her name was. Younger, maybe mid-30s. I asked her if she had ever heard anything about a girl named Emily. She looked surprised at first, then cautious. She glanced down the hallway toward the break room before saying, "You should talk to Miss Pence about anything official." I asked her plainly, "Has anyone ever said anything about the mirrors in that building?" Her lips pressed together. Not angry, more like nervous. "Kids make things up," she said. "We don't feed into it." That's when I realized they weren't ignoring it. They were avoiding it. They knew something, or at least they believed enough of it to stay quiet. I drove home early that day. Zoe was on the living room floor drawing again. Her hands moved slowly, carefully, as if she was tracing something already there. I asked her if she wanted to go to the park. She shook her head. I asked if she'd seen the girl in the mirror that day. She nodded. I sat down on the couch across from her. "What does she say to you?" Zoe didn't answer. "Does she ask you to do anything?" No reply. Then finally Zoe looked up. "She's lonely," she said. Just that. I didn't know what to say. I think I nodded. Maybe that was the moment I stopped trying to figure out if it was real. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that it was real to Zoe. Later that evening, I dug out an old photo album from the storage bins we hadn't unpacked yet. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe something to ground myself, a reminder of who Zoe had been before all this. I found a photo of her 3rd birthday. She was smiling, frosting on her cheek, wearing a paper crown. It felt like a different life. That night, after I tucked her in, I stayed in her doorway a little longer than usual. I kept the monitor running, but this time I stayed closer, just outside her room in the hallway, back against the wall. Around 2 a.m, I heard it. Not a voice, not a footstep. A sound I still can't explain. A low hum, barely audible, almost like static under a melody. I opened the door slowly. Zoe was standing in front of the mirror facing it. Her eyes closed. Her reflection, if it was even hers, was already watching me. I stood in the hallway that night, just outside Zoe's door, watching her through the crack where the nightlight spilled onto the floor. She was standing perfectly still in front of the mirror, her eyes shut, her hands hanging loose at her sides. That low humming sound was still there, almost too soft to be real, and it took me a second to realize it wasn't coming from her. It was coming from the monitor, picking up something the naked ear couldn't quite catch. I didn't move. I don't think I even breathed. I just watched. And when she finally opened her eyes, she didn't look at me. She looked into the glass like she was waiting for someone to answer her. I don't know how long I stood there, but when she finally climbed back into bed without a word, I stayed up until sunrise just to make sure she didn't get up again. Work became impossible. I'd sit at my desk and stare at the same spreadsheet for half an hour without noticing. I stopped answering emails. I skipped meetings. My manager tried to check in a couple times, asked if everything was okay at home. I told him we were still adjusting to the move, that Zoe had been having nightmares. He nodded, offered to lighten my caseload for a week or two, and I thanked him. But I knew I couldn't keep this going much longer. I started spending my breaks in the car scrolling through old articles, cold case sites, anything tied to Sunnybrook. I searched every variation I could think of: child missing from daycare, unexplained events, daycare injury, cover-up, but nothing useful came up. The only thing that stuck in my head was that single forum post. Anyone else's kid talk about. The girl in the mirrors. I read it over and over again like it might change. It never did. By the end of that week, I was leaving work early, picking Zoe up before nap time. She didn't complain. She never asked why. I think she was relieved. I stopped letting her sleep in her own room, too. I set up her mattress on the floor next to my bed and left the hallway light on all night. She still didn't talk much, but her humming faded for a few days. I told myself that was a good sign, that maybe we just needed distance from that place. But one morning, as I was making breakfast, she walked into the kitchen with a drawing in her hand. 2 figures again, one small, one tall. But this time the tall one wasn't scribbled out. It had arms and legs and long black lines where hair should have been. The eyes were hollow ovals. The mouth was open like it was singing. When I asked her who it was, Zoe didn't answer. She set it on the counter and went to eat her cereal. I kept that drawing in my back pocket all day. I looked at it in the car at my desk in the bathroom with the door locked. I don't know why, but it felt like something had shifted. Like whatever this was, it wasn't just circling us anymore. It had stepped closer. That night, I left the monitor running, but also set up an old camcorder I found in one of the moving boxes. I pointed it straight at the mirror. No audio, just a steady visual. I told myself I needed more than a hunch if I was going to do anything with this. That if I talked to anyone, police, a doctor, a lawyer, I'd need something concrete. But deep down, I think I just needed someone else to see what I was seeing. Zoe fell asleep fast. I sat in the hallway again, laptop open, monitor feed on one side, live camcorder window on the other. Midnight passed. Then 1. The house was still. Then the monitor pinged, motion detected. I leaned forward, heart pounding. Zoe was sitting up again, same posture, but this time she was speaking. Not loud, barely a whisper, but her lips were moving. I turned up the volume. Static. Then a faint rustling like wind through dry leaves, and then for a brief second I heard another voice layered under hers. Not a child's. Something older, tired. Too many voices woven together like they'd been saying the same thing for years. I shut the laptop and went to her room. She was still sitting up, eyes open, mouth closed now. I called her name softly. She didn't respond. I stepped inside, and the second I crossed the threshold, she turned her head to the side slowly, mechanically, and looked at me. Then she laid back down without a word. I sat at the edge of her bed for the next hour, too afraid to leave, too numb to speak. She never opened her eyes again. But I could feel the tension in the room, like the air wasn't settling right. The next morning, I brought up therapy. I didn't want to scare her, so I just said we might talk to someone who helps kids with big feelings. She didn't argue, but she didn't agree either. She just said, "She won't like that," and went back to brushing her hair. That was the moment I realized no one else was going to fix this. Not my sister, not the daycare, not some counselor who'd spend the first session building Lego towers while Zoe smiled and said nothing. Whatever this was, it was buried somewhere deeper. I just had to find out where. That afternoon, I pulled up the daycare's state licensing records. Nothing stood out. No violations, no incidents on file. I checked property records, permits, inspection histories. Still nothing. The place was clean. Too clean. Then I went back to the file folder I'd taken from the storage room during my first visit. The one labeled Emily. The enrollment form listed a contact number long since disconnected and a home address on the west side of town. I drove by it after dark. The windows were boarded, A rusted swing set in the yard creaked when the wind picked up. No lights, no cars. Whatever family had once lived there was gone now. Back home, I printed the photo of Emily, the one from the enrollment form, and set it on the table in front of Zoe while she was drawing. I didn't say anything at first. She kept coloring. Then she stopped, looked at the photo, her brow furrowed. She reached out, touched the corner of the paper, and pulled her hand back like it had burned her. "That's not her," she whispered. I asked what she meant. She shook her head. "She looks different now." I didn't press. She slid the photo back to me and left the room. I sat there a long time holding that picture. The date on it said 2018. That was 5 years ago. If something happened to that girl, someone should have said something. But there were no missing persons bulletins, no news coverage, no names etched into the town's memory. Just that folder in a locked storage room, and Zoe's drawings, and a reflection that moved on its own. That night, I turned off every light in the house and sat on the floor outside her room, just me and the monitor, watching, waiting. And somewhere past midnight, when the static kicked in and the reflection turned before she did, I started to think it wasn't just Zoe who had been chosen. Maybe we both had. It was a Thursday night when I found the drawing. I'd just come home from work late again, and Zoe was already asleep. The house was quiet. I tossed my keys on the counter, microwaved some leftovers, and walked into the kitchen to throw away the box from her new crayons. That's when I noticed it pinned to the fridge under one of those alphabet magnets. It looked like her usual drawings at first: stick figures, rounded hills, a few clouds. But the longer I stared, the more I realized this one was different. There were 2 people drawn in the center. One was clearly Zoe. The other... It took me a minute to understand what I was looking at. The figure next to her was taller, much taller, but completely blacked out. No face, no hands, just a thick outline filled in with jagged, dark strokes. And in the space between them where you'd expect arms, maybe holding hands, there was a chain. A single crayon line connecting them running from Zoe's wrist to the figure's side. I pulled the drawing off the fridge slowly, trying not to crumple the edges. Zoe had written her name above her figure in crooked backwards letters. There was no name above the other one. She was sitting on the living room floor, flipping through a picture book when I asked, "Sweetheart, can you come here for a second?" She hesitated but stood and walked over. Her steps were quiet, almost careful. I crouched down to her level and held up the drawing. "Tell me about this one. Who's this next to you?" Her fingers twisted the hem of her shirt and she glanced at the paper, then away. "Nobody," she said softly. I waited. "But you drew her," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Is this someone from daycare?" She shook her head. Then, before I could ask again, she started humming. That same melody, slow and winding like a tune remembered from a dream. It was the kind of sound that didn't belong in a room with the lights on. She hummed it until she reached the hallway. Then she stopped and went to her room without another word. That night I watched the baby monitor the way I had every night for the past 2 weeks. But now I watched it differently. I wasn't just waiting for movement. I was looking for that chain. Some sign of what Zoe had drawn. The reflection didn't move that night, not that I could see. But around 2:30, she sat up in bed. She didn't speak. She didn't turn. She just sat there awake, staring at the ceiling, for 47 minutes. Then she laid back down and went still. I noted the time, saved the clip, watched it twice. Still no answers. The next day I picked her up early again. This time, when I walked into the lobby, the front desk was empty. I waited a moment, then stepped back toward the hallway where the storage rooms were. I knew it wasn't a good idea. I knew I wasn't supposed to be back there, but I needed to see it again. I slipped inside the storage room, careful not to touch anything. The backpack was still there, right where I'd left it under a shelf, partially hidden by a stack of broken binders. I unzipped it again. Same contents, sweater, pencil box, old folded papers. But this time, I noticed something I hadn't before. Tucked into the inner pocket behind the crumpled lunch napkin was a scrap of yellow construction paper. A list written in a child's handwriting. I had to squint to read it. The letters were messy, uneven, but I could make out 5 lines. The first 3 said nap singing and closet. The last 2 were harder to read. The 4th looked like quiet room. The 5th was just a single word. Under. No explanation. No punctuation. Just under. That word stayed in my head for the rest of the day. I tried not to read into it. Kids write nonsense all the time. Lists of games or made-up chores. But it didn't feel random. And it didn't feel like a game. That night after Zoe went to bed, I sat on the floor beside her closet. I opened it slowly. Just her clothes. A row of shoes, a few storage bins. Nothing unusual. But the mirror on the back of the closet door caught the hallway light in a way I hadn't noticed before. It looked too sharp, too clean, like it didn't belong in a child's room. I closed the door and stared at it from across the room for a long time. Later I brought the drawing and the paper scrap to the kitchen table. I laid them side by side. I kept thinking about that last word, under. I looked through her old artwork, her notebooks from daycare, anything that might match the handwriting. Nothing came close. It wasn't Zoe's, at least not recently, and that made it worse. Because if she didn't write it, someone else did. I started mapping out every piece I had. Zoe's behavior, the photos, the reflection delay, the girl in the mirror, the chain, Emily. That name kept floating back to the surface even when I tried to focus on other things. She wasn't just a name in a file anymore. She was part of something that Zoe had somehow become tangled in, and I didn't know how to untangle her. The next morning I tried again with Miss Pence. I told her I'd found a drawing in Zoe's bag, that it concerned me, that I thought something might have happened at daycare that was affecting her emotionally. I wasn't accusing. I just wanted answers. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We do everything we can to create a supportive environment here," she said. "Children sometimes express feelings in abstract ways. It's part of development." I asked her if she remembered a student named Emily Hayes. That wiped the smile from her face. She paused, then said, "I'm afraid I can't discuss former students. I asked if Emily's parents had ever been contacted, if they had taken her out of the program. She said I'm not at liberty to share that information." That was the moment I stopped asking questions, because it was clear she already knew what I was trying to find out. And she wasn't going to help. That evening, as I cleaned up Zoe's crayons from the floor, I found a new drawing, folded and slid halfway under the couch. This one was different. There was no sky, no grass, just a square, a box, and inside it a curled-up figure, smaller than any she'd drawn before, tucked into the corner like it was trying not to be seen. And below it, in small letters almost too small to read, was one word. Help. I didn't tell Zoe what I found under the couch. I just folded the drawing in half and tucked it into the back of my wallet. I told myself I'd bring it to the police if things got worse, but the truth was I wasn't even sure what I'd report. That my daughter was drawing trapped figures, that something in a mirror was mimicking her with a delay, that an old backpack hidden in a daycare storage room held a child's list with the word under scribbled at the bottom. It all sounded like fragments of a dream. But dreams don't leave paper behind, and they don't leave drawings that ask for help. That night I sat in bed with the monitor on and the camcorder running again. Zoe had fallen asleep beside me, her mattress on the floor, the covers pulled up to her chin, her rabbit pressed against her cheek. I kept the light on in the hallway. Around 1:30 I heard a thud. Not loud, just enough to make me sit up. I reached for the monitor. The feed was clear. Zoe was still under the blanket. But something in the room felt wrong. I got up and walked to her doorway. Everything looked normal. Her closet was closed. The mirror reflected only what it should, but the feeling wouldn't go away, the same way pressure builds before a storm breaks. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat on the couch watching the camcorder feed, waiting for another flicker, another glitch. When the sun finally came through the blinds, I got dressed and grabbed my keys. I told Zoe I needed to run an errand before work. She nodded, still half asleep, and curled back under the blanket. I drove back to the daycare. I parked down the street where I could watch the back entrance without being seen. It was still early, no one had arrived yet. I waited until the last of the morning traffic cleared. Then I circled around to the side door I'd noticed once before, the one they rarely used. It had an old bolt lock rusted along the edge. I pulled the tools I'd brought from the glove compartment, just a thin screwdriver and a bent paperclip. I don't know what I thought I was doing. I'd never broken into anything in my life. But my hands moved steady. After a few tries, the bolt gave with a soft click. Inside, the air hit me first, stale, like damp paper and chemical dust. I moved slowly, flashlight beam sweeping across low cabinets and stacked furniture. I didn't touch anything, just looked. The same boxes from before, the same binders. I found the pink backpack again, tucked in the far corner. I moved past it this time, deeper into the room. That's when I saw it. Near the back wall, behind a stack of broken shelving units, a section of floor where the boards didn't quite match. The grain ran the wrong direction. My chest tightened. I knelt down and ran my fingers along the edge. One of the boards shifted slightly when I pressed. I wedged the screwdriver underneath and pried. It lifted with a groan, dry wood scraping against itself. The smell hit me before anything else. Sour. Wet. Old. I shone the light inside. My stomach turned. Beneath the floor, wrapped in a piece of rotting cloth, was a bundle no larger than a child's backpack. A small sweater. A pair of pink sneakers. And bones. Tiny. Curled into themselves. I couldn't breathe. I sat back hard, my flashlight beam jumping across the walls. I didn't hear her come in. When I turned, Miss Pence was standing in the doorway. Her hands were empty, her face unreadable. We stared at each other in silence for several seconds. Then she stepped into the room slowly, like she was walking into a memory she didn't want to face. "You shouldn't be here," she said. Her voice was calm even, too even. I stood up. "You knew I said. You knew she was here the whole time." Her eyes dropped to the open floorboard, then back to me. "You don't understand what you're digging into." I held up the flashlight. My hand was shaking. "Her name was Emily, and you buried her." She didn't deny it. She didn't explain. She just looked past me toward the corner of the room like she was waiting for something else to move. I stepped back, but she didn't follow. She just said, "You need to leave." And then, more quietly, before it wakes up again. I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't want to. I walked out of that room with my heart pounding and the weight of something I hadn't planned to carry. I didn't stop moving until I was back in my car, the engine running, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold the wheel. I didn't go home. Not right away. I drove around for a while, not watching the road, just trying to keep my head clear. Eventually, I pulled into the grocery store parking lot and sat there with the windows down, trying to figure out what to do next. I had the drawing, I had the backpack, I had a name, and now I had a body. But I still didn't have a story that made sense to anyone but me. I couldn't go to the police yet, not without more. Not without knowing what she meant about waking it up. I needed time. I needed to keep Zoe safe. I looked at my phone. No messages, no missed calls. I turned the key and drove home slow. When I walked through the front door, the house felt quiet in a different way. Not empty, just waiting. Zoe was on the floor with her blocks, building something long and narrow. A hallway, maybe. She looked up and smiled like nothing had happened. I sat on the floor beside her and asked what she was building. She said, It's a place people forget. I nodded and didn't press. That night I put her to bed early. I checked the closet, checked under the bed, sat on the edge of the mattress and brushed her hair back from her face. She looked tired, but calm. Before I turned off the light, she whispered, "She's not quiet anymore." I froze. "What do you mean?" I asked. Zoe didn't answer. She rolled over and pulled the blanket up to her chin. I closed the door halfway and stood in the hallway a long time. The baby monitor was silent, but I knew better than to trust silence. That night the humming didn't come through the monitor, but something else did. A voice. Not loud, not angry, just steady, like it had been waiting its turn to speak. It said, "You found her." Then it paused. "Now find me." I didn't sleep that night. After the voice came through the monitor, I turned off the sound, but the silence after that was even worse. I sat at the edge of the bed with the camcorder in my lap, scrolling back through the footage like maybe I'd missed something. Every frame of Zoe's room felt heavier now, like the air itself had a presence. And it wasn't just about Emily anymore. That voice, "You found her. Now find me." It hadn't sounded angry, just certain, like it had always known I'd get here eventually. The next morning, Zoe didn't mention it. She acted like nothing had changed, like everything in the world still made sense. But her drawings had changed. I found one tucked into her book bag that she hadn't shown me. It was a hallway again, but darker this time. No sky, no windows, just long black lines and in the center a mirror. A rectangle with nothing reflected, nothing inside it, just blank space. It didn't look unfinished. It looked empty on purpose. I folded it carefully and slipped it into my coat pocket. Then I picked up the phone. I didn't call the police. I called a woman named Rebecca Whitley. She used to be a special ed aide at the daycare years ago. Her name had shown up in a parent complaint online, something about her resigning suddenly after a student went missing. The details had been scrubbed, but the tone stuck with me. I told her I was a parent, that my daughter had been seeing things, that I had reason to believe a girl named Emily Hayes had died on the premises. There was a pause on the line. Then she said, "You need to meet me somewhere public. I'll bring what I have." We met at a diner off the interstate. It was bright, loud, and full of movement, exactly the kind of place I would have avoided a week ago. But now it felt safer somehow. Rebecca looked tired, not just older tired. She slid into the booth across from me with a canvas bag clutched in her lap. "I thought I was done with this," she said. I tried to forget. I didn't say anything. I just waited. She reached into the bag and pulled out a manila folder. Inside were photos, drawings, copies of incident reports she wasn't supposed to have. One showed a classroom mirror cracked diagonally. "That happened after Emily disappeared," she said. "We were told it was an accident, but one of the kids said something came through it, crawled out." Another sheet had a drawing done in crayon by a child years ago. A mirror again. And beside it, a girl curled up in the corner of the paper. Same as Zoe's drawing. Same posture. Same angle. I flipped the sheet over. The name at the top was written in shaky pencil. Zoe. Not my Zoe. Another one. A different girl. Different year. "This isn't the first time," Rebecca said. "The girl in that picture. She's not around anymore either. I didn't eat. I didn't even drink the coffee. I just stared at the papers until the noise of the diner started to fade. Rebecca was still talking, but the words felt far away. Something about how the building had been remodeled 3 times. How no one ever questioned why the mirrors had to be replaced so often. How one child had stopped speaking altogether after being locked in the quiet room. But it wasn't the reports that got me. It was the photo she saved for last. A hallway, probably the one near the supply closet. In the background, there was a wall of cubbies and a sink. Nothing unusual, but reflected in the mirror, faint but clear, was a girl standing where no one had been. Her face was pale, her mouth slightly open, and her eyes weren't looking at the camera. They were looking at something behind it. I drove home in silence. No radio. No phone calls. Just the sound of tires on pavement and that drawing in my coat pocket. When I pulled into the driveway, I didn't go inside right away. I sat there with the engine off, trying to decide what to do next. I couldn't leave Zoe in that house. Not with something speaking through her monitor. Not when her drawings looked like cries for help. I took her to my sister's that evening, told her I had some plumbing issues to handle and just needed one night. She didn't ask questions. She never really did. Once Zoe was asleep in the spare bedroom, I headed back alone. The house was colder than usual. Not physically, but the air felt different. Still like the walls were waiting. I didn't turn on the lights. I went straight to Zoe's room, pulled the dresser away from the closet door, and unscrewed the mirror from the back. It was heavier than I expected. I carried it into the living room and leaned it against the wall. Then I sat in front of it. Just sat. The room was quiet. The kind of quiet that hums in your ears after a long day. And for a long time, nothing happened. But then slowly my reflection shifted. Not all at once. Just slightly off rhythm. My hands moved, and a half-second later the image followed. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't lag. It was watching. I spoke not loudly, just enough to be heard. "Who are you?" I said. The reflection didn't answer, but something behind it moved. A hallway. Narrow, wooden floorboards. A single door at the end. And through that door, a room. Small, dim, with a child sitting on the floor, humming. The same tune Zoe hummed in her sleep. The girl looked up. Her eyes were sunken but clear. She wasn't a ghost. She wasn't imaginary. She was real. And she mouthed one word. Basement. I stood slowly, legs stiff from sitting. I didn't think. I just moved. Down the stairs, past the laundry, to the corner of the basement I hadn't touched in years. There was a cabinet nailed shut behind an old mattress. I yanked it loose. Inside nothing, just wood paneling and dust, but the back wall had seams. I traced my fingers along the edge. Knocked. Hollow. I grabbed the hammer from the toolbox and pulled. The panel gave way with a snap. Behind it was a narrow crawl space, no taller than a child. I aimed the flashlight inside and froze. There was a room. Not finished. Just dirt walls and a cement slab. In the corner was a pile of blankets, a small shoe, and on the wall, a mirror. Not framed, just embedded into the dirt like someone had placed it there long ago. I crouched and crawled in slowly, knees scraping the ground. The smell was faint, but familiar like wet stone and forgotten air. I touched the mirror. It was cold. My reflection didn't follow me this time. It stayed frozen, and beside my own image was another face. A woman's, hollow-eyed, watching me. And then from behind me a sound I hadn't heard since Zoe was a baby. The soft creak of a door closing that no one had opened. I didn't move right away. Just crouched there in the dark, the flashlight beam jittering across the dirt floor while that door upstairs groaned shut like it had something to say. Behind me, the crawl space stretched barely 2 feet high. In front of me, that buried mirror, its surface slick with cold, kept holding a reflection that didn't quite match mine. I looked back at it then, at the tiny shoe by the wall, then the blanket twisted into a pile like someone had slept there and never got up. That's when I finally stood. My knees popped, breath tight in my throat. I backed out slowly, dragging the hammer behind me. Every sound in that basement felt sharper now, each footstep too loud, each shift of weight pressing against something unseen. Once I made it back upstairs, I locked the basement door behind me, wedged a chair under the knob, and called the police. I didn't know how to explain what I'd seen, but I told them the truth, or the version I thought might be heard, that I'd found a hidden space beneath the house, that it looked like someone had been living there or hiding, that I was concerned it might connect to an old case, maybe more than one. It took them less than 10 minutes to arrive. 2 officers, one older, one younger, walked through the house with me. I showed them the panel in the basement wall, the mirror, the shoe. They didn't say much at first, just took photos and made notes. I watched the older one run his hand across the dirt wall, like he was feeling for something beyond texture. Then he stepped back and called for a forensic team. Within the hour, the house was crawling with people boots on hardwood cameras, flashing voices kept low but clipped. They sealed off the crawl space. One of the techs pulled me aside and asked how I found it. I told him about the drawings, the camcorder footage, the voice from the monitor. He blinked once, then nodded, no disbelief. No smirk. Just a note in his pad and a quiet thank you. Later they found more. Tiny bones wrapped in cloth old baby teeth, a rusted pendant with a name etched so faintly you could barely make it out. Emily. The confirmation came a few days later. Dental records from the Hayes family matched the remains. After all those years, there was finally an answer. But the thing is, answers don't close doors. They open new ones, especially when things don't line up. The body had been there at least 10 years, buried behind that panel sealed in a space no contractor remembered building. But our house had only stood for 8. The basement hadn't even existed before that. The question no one could answer was how. How had remains that old ended up inside a wall poured only 8 years ago? They checked permits, blueprints surveyed the lot. No prior structures, no foundations, no record of any demolition. It was like the space had folded into itself, hiding something it was never supposed to hold. And the mirror. They took it in for analysis. Not because they thought it was evidence, but because one of the techs said she saw a child's face in it while bagging it. A girl who blinked. The daycare was temporarily shut down after that. Not because they admitted fault, but because 2 more families came forward with complaints. Unfiled, never documented stories about children whispering to reflections, one boy who claimed to speak to his twin in the mirror, even though he'd never had a sibling. The local paper ran a cautious headline, "Undisclosed Remains Discovered in Residential Crawl Space," and the story made a small wave before slipping under. But Rebecca's records didn't. She gave everything to the department report's drawings her own sworn statement. It forced an internal review. The director resigned 2 weeks later, the quiet kind of resignation that doesn't come with a press release. I kept Zoe with my sister for a while after that. She didn't ask to come home. She seemed content in a way I hadn't seen in months. Slept through the night, drew trees and animals again, smiled when she poured her cereal. But when I finally brought her back months later, something in the house had shifted. We walked in together, hand in hand. She paused in the entryway, looked down the hall toward her room, and whispered, "She's not here anymore." I didn't ask who she meant. I just squeezed her hand a little tighter. The detective assigned to the case, Mendez, kept me in the loop after that. We met twice in person. He told me they'd confirmed multiple sets of remains, but only one had been fully identified. He asked if I'd ever noticed signs of structural tampering, if I'd found objects in the walls before. I said no. Then I asked him something that had been gnawing at me. If the house wasn't old enough to hold that mirror, then where had it come from? He didn't answer at first, just looked down at the file in his lap. Then he said, "There's no manufacturer, no branding. The backing isn't standard. We're still looking into it." But I could tell from his tone that they weren't expecting to find much. 1 week later, the mirror went missing from the evidence locker. No break-in, no chain of custody error, just gone. That same day, a worker at the daycare, one who hadn't been part of the earlier reports, was found dead in her apartment, ruled a suicide. But something about the way Mendez told me, it didn't feel clean. I asked if it was connected. He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either. I went back into the basement that night alone. The panel was gone now, replaced with fresh drywall and clean corners. But I knew where it had been. I stood there in the quiet, just breathing, trying to listen. And for the first time since all this began, I didn't feel watched. I didn't feel her. But I didn't feel alone either. I still keep the drawing in my desk drawer. The one Zoe made with the hollow eyes and the tiny girl standing just beyond the edge of the frame. It's wrinkled now, faded at the corners, but I haven't brought myself to throw it away. Some days I pull it out just to remind myself that she really saw something, that it wasn't just in my head, that maybe what children notice in silence is more honest than what adults try to explain away. The house is quieter now. Normal, I guess, if there is such a thing. The drywall's been patched, the crawl space sealed, the daycare never reopened, and the building eventually sold to a real estate group out of state. They're planning to tear it down. I haven't driven by since I heard. Zoe's older now. She asks fewer questions, draws different things. She still won't sleep with the closet door open, but I don't make her. I think she remembers more than she says. Sometimes I catch her watching the hallway like she's waiting for a shift in the air. But she doesn't talk about the mirror anymore. Doesn't mention Emily. And I've stopped asking. Not because I don't care, but because I've learned that sometimes the only way forward is to let the unspoken stay quiet. Detective Mendez kept in touch for a while after the case was closed. Said there were no new leads, no charges, no further remains. The mirror was never recovered. Officially, they wrote the case off as an unexplained anomaly involving historic remains, a phrase that means nothing. But he told me over coffee one afternoon that he didn't believe it either, that in all his years he'd never seen a case bend time like that, or space, or memory. I used to think justice meant answers, names, arrests, a courtroom where the story could be said out loud and someone would listen. But sometimes justice is quieter. It's not about winning, it's about not looking away, about standing in the dark long enough to hear what's there. I think that's what Zoe did, what I had to learn to do, and what maybe, if we're lucky, someone else might do if this ever happens again. Because I don't think it was just our house. I don't think it was just Emily. Whatever left that mirror didn't belong to a single place. It belonged to forgetting. And forgetting is a kind of burial, too. I still hear sounds in the house sometimes. But they don't scare me the way they used to. They feel more like echoes now, not warnings. Just reminders that what's hidden doesn't stay hidden. That even a whisper spoken softly enough can still be heard years later, especially if someone's listening. If this story stayed with you, consider sharing it so no child's name gets lost in the silence.